When I read Dave Holborn's resume, I nearly fell out of my chair. David is a retired airline captain. He used to fly 747s, he used to be in the Air Force, and now he instructs for command flight training with his own simulator business.
And this is not just a simulator, like a screen. This is like a full, massive 220-degree wraparound fake cockpit with all the buttons and bells and whistles. It's unbelievable.
So Michael and I are heading down to Goulburn Airport to see Dave at Southern Cross Flight Simulator Services. Now, Michael, being a VFR pilot, he's going to do a really cool exercise. It's something we can't really do in the aircraft. It's a VFR into IMC exercise.
Although I earned my pilot's license for blue skies and sunny days, I think it's really important because the weather conditions wherever you are in Australia or in the world can change really quickly. And one of the leading causes of death for general aviation pilots is VFR, that's visual flight, into IMC. Hard cloud, and I do not want to die if I accidentally fly into cloud.
Exactly. Now, this isn't your typical boring YouTube video where some aviation influencer has run out of content and decided to start filming simulator videos in lieu of an aircraft. This is a genuine aviation love story about a man who has lived, eaten, breathed aviation for over 60 years.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I spent a lot of time on Microsoft Flight Simulator as a kid.
Yeah.
Like thousands of hours on Flight Simulator as a kid. So this flight sim setup that he's got down here is just unbelievable. It blew my mind when I first saw it.
So about 4 years ago, I was sitting at the command flight training office, got a phone call. It was Dave on the other line. I'd heard his name before, but didn't know who he was. He didn't give me any clues as to what his previous experience was, but he did say he'd been a simulator instructor before and was interested in doing some sim instructing for us. I'm like, okay, cool. He sent through a resume. About 5 minutes later, when I opened his resume, I genuinely nearly fell off my chair. It is unbelievable. It's a resume like no other. We met Dave outside his hangar at Goulburn and he showed us around. His walls are decorated from floor to ceiling with photos from his career highlights, particularly of the gorgeous 747s that he once flew. The crown jewel of his hangar is definitely his state-of-the-art simulator with a whopping 220-degree field of view.
Dave Holborn, and I ex-Air Force, 18 years in the RAAF. Most of it as a flying instructor, including a couple of years in America, in the United States Air Force as a flying instructor, and then 26 years with in the airlines, Boeing 747s. How did I get into flying? Well, I immigrated with my family in 1954. I was 9 years old. And from that you can tell I'm not a spring chicken. And we moved to Victoria, down in the Nepean Highway when there was almost nothing there, and living next door to an airline pilot who was flying for, I'm not sure if it was ANA or Ansett ANA, but anyway, he took me, and he was an ex-World War II DC-3 Dakota pilot flying the hump. And he took me to Essendon Airport, which was the international airport at the time, and sat me in something. I'm not sure what it was to this day, but probably a DC-4 or something like that. And the rest is history. That's how it got started. I'm not sure, whether I fell in love with flying or fell in love with aeroplanes, to tell you the truth. I've often thought that. Soloed in September 1963. And the silly thing about it, I remember when I was taxiing in, on the interphone I said to myself, I'm a pilot. Little did I know that there was going to be a lot more to do before that. How did I get into the Air Force? Well, I don't know what made me decide to, but anyway, I just applied. And lo and behold, they sent me a letter. I was looking at it the other day, saying, congratulations, Mr. Holborn, please report here, here and here and do this, this, that and the other, and the rest is history. Off I went to Point Cook to be a student on the Windshield. Big radial engine tail dragger. It smelt of Dettol where other people had been sick. It smelt of of the petrol, the avgas, as you did rolls and it dribbled down the windscreen. It smelled of rubber because we were wearing a rubber mask. Doing aerobatics, I was being sick. So they sent me to the doctor. The doctor said, "You're finished, you're scrubbed off course." I went back to see the flight commander. My instructor was the flight commander, who was a fantastic guy, and said, "Have you run out of sick bags?" And I said, "No, sir." And so he made me fly with one hand and vomit with the other. When, you know, in the middle of a manoeuvre, I'd say, handing over, and he'd say, "No." The boss summoned me one day and asked me what I wanted to fly. I said, "Hercules, sir," and he said, "Thank goodness for that, because you never make a fighter pilot." 2 or 3 months later, we were flogging all over the world. And of course the flight deck, being a Lockheed flight deck, was very wide, and in the Lockheed aeroplanes, you normally, like TriStar was the same, you go outside the seats to get into the seats, whereas the Boeings, you got to go through the middle. Yeah, so I got my first command at age 24 on a Hercules. At 25, going into Vung Tau in South Vietnam, where the runway was, I think, when they were working on it, 2,900 feet long, 50 feet wide, half PSP planking on sand and bitumen with no markings on it whatsoever. I mean, Vung Tau was a rest and recreation place, but it did get attacked from time to time. Air refueling, exchange job, yeah, with American Air Force, yes, and it was attached to the 509th Bomb Wing at Pease Air Force Base, New Hampshire, which is north of Boston. Yeah, and we drove a 1965 Buick Wildcat, which stretched all the way from there back to here. And we got involved with the C5A program, which was just being introduced, refueling the C5A. Galaxy, which at the time was the biggest aeroplane in the world with a huge, great bulbous nose. The trouble is with the C5 Galaxy and that big bulbous nose, he'd come in and push the tail up and cause you to descend in front of him. So you had to, if you were manually flying, you had to mistrim it, see, like you're pushing forward like so, because when he was in, it was all okay. And I remember one night taking, there were 5 of us, 4 tankers, 1 tanker spare, and 2 C5 Galaxies across the Atlantic. And I hear the boom operator saying, "Okay, 5-1, go back to the pre-contact, because you don't want to be messing around in class. Go back to the pre-contact, we'll start again," sort of thing. And I remember this 5-1, that was his call sign, saying, negative boom, minimum fuel, stick it in, stick it in." So I'd never seen V1 engine failure, which is simulated engine failure at decision speed, basically. It's not one of those things you just sort of taxi out on the runway and you think, right, okay, here we go, whack, close the throttle. Because it's potentially quite a dangerous manoeuvre, In fact, they don't do it anymore in aeroplanes, they only do it in simulators. He's got his hand on the thrust levers. Approaching V1, I call my hand to the thrust levers, and let's say it's number 4, the right outboard. So I will then, after we call V1, I'll say engine failure, and I'll move number 4 about 1.5 inches, not very much. It's not going to go whack like this, just enough to have his feet, and to make sure that his feet are moving in the right direction, that he's putting the correct rudder in. So if he puts the incorrect rudder in, it's the last thing he'll ever do. Oh, explosive decompression in the C-130. I was co-pilot at the time, and the CO was the captain. We were out of, I guess we were out of Singapore Changi, something like that. That's before Changi was an international airport. It used to be an RAAF base. And it would have been Changi, I think, or Tenga or Seletar. Anyway, and I think we must have been heading up to Vietnam, because we were heading north out of there. And then all of a sudden, ka-woomph, and we had an explosive decompression. And it's very interesting because bear in mind, it's a very humid environment in that part of the world, and you're instantaneously IMC. Fog so thick, can't see a hand in front of your face, instantaneously. And so it's put the oxygen mask on, and then with the ventilation and what have you, then the fog cleared out of the way, and it turned out that the ramp had not been, the ramp door, the bit that comes up, and then there's the ramp, the bit that goes down. The actual ramp, one of the locks, was not quite over as it should have been, and it just let go. is rubber on runways, Type A 747. Coming back from Tokyo, landing at Taipei on runway 24, feeling for the brakes, but there was nothing there. The brakes just didn't work, and I ended up with feet flat to the floor. And so I did remember that the manual said that once you put your feet down like that, don't bring them back up again, otherwise the anti-skid system has to reschedule itself. There was a telephone call from Cathay asking me if I'd like to come up and be a co-pilot on the TriStar. They said, the bad news is, yeah, we know you've got an Air Force instrument rating examiner and all that sort of stuff, but you need to get a civil one. So I had to, in Canberra there, strap on a Seminole and do what was required. And then, in those days, they actually shut engine down, feathered it to do an approach. Within a couple of years, I got the command on the 747. So I was based at, operating anyway out of Kai Tak Airport, which we know has a reputation and one thing and another, and which was quite exciting at times. However, you know, in bad visibility and with the crosswind, it could be tricky. Flying an ILS essentially, except it was called an IGS, Instrument Guidance System, and when you got the ident, you got the Morse ident, and at the end of it, it says, "This is not an ILS. Pilots must turn right at minima." Mountains on the left of you, a couple of thousand feet high. Mountains in front of you, a couple of thousand feet high. So you got to turn anyway. And they had sequence flashing lights going around the corner. So from 675 at minima, you couldn't quite see the threshold yet, but if you just kept the rate of descent going, you picked up the sequence flashing lights, and pretty soon you could see the puppies, and so you followed the puppies down. So that was interesting. I had a couple of diversions out of there, and one of them was after a typhoon had gone past, but it was windy, but not too bad really, but there was wind shear around, and so as we're coming on the way in from Taipei again actually, and on the way in we hear people are going round every now and then. Someone's going around, and they're calling wind shear. So anyway, we did the approach, and from the minima around the corner, and it was 8/8 blue. There's no weather. No sooner started around the corner, we got a massive lifting wind shear of about 30-40 knots, and so we clearly went around. We were very unstable. Anyway, so we're off to Taipei, and in the middle of this departure, getting a new clearance, radar wants to know, approach wants to know whether I'd like to have another go, and I said no, thank you very much. We're going to Taipei. So we went to Taipei, and we ended up in the airport hotel, and had a typhoon party, which one did from time to time in the good old days. You had all these crews, Qantas crews and God knows what, crews from all over the place. They were all converging there, all with the left hand in the pocket and the right hand around the beer glass, telling each other how wonderful they are, and we are, and I was. And the flight engineer comes up to me with the beer, and he says, "Two great things you said today, Dave." And I said, "Oh yes, mate." He said, "What?" He said, "Well," he said, "the first one was going round." And I said, "Yes, absolutely." I said, "What was the second one?" He said, "The second one is you're not going back there again." And I said, "Fair enough."
Runway 35, clear for takeoff.
The sky is overcast and the visibility poor. That reported 8-kilometre visibility looks more like 3, and you can't judge the height of the cloud.
Dave trains both IFR and VFR in his simulator, but one of the most valuable training scenarios he does for command flight training students is the VFR into IMC exercise. The common theory is that if a VFR pilot inadvertently enters IMC, they'll be dead 178 seconds later.
You now have 178 seconds to live.
One of the biggest killers in aviation, and something that can seldom be practiced in the aircraft. Hence, this reinforces the value of having a simulator as a training aid. Dave briefs the student on what to expect, how to handle and how to fly on instruments, and most importantly, how to survive their VFR into IMC experience. Once they've completed the briefing, it's time for the simulator practice.
Okay, so Michael, here we go. We're going to...
Where are we off to today?
we're at Murray Bridge, runway 19, and we're going to Kingscote today.
Not Taipei, Kai Tak?
No such luck. No, not today. Just going to Kingscote.
Beautiful.
Tell you what, the weather's looking not quite like the Met Man said, though, isn't it?
It's
It's a bit cloudy,
it
isn't
is.
it? Anyway, why don't you go ahead and get in there
Go and
get
jump in?
yourself ready.
Sounds like a plan.
And I'll, right, so we've done the pre-flight and the engine is running.
Oh wow,
Right.
that was an easy pre-flight.
It was an easy pre-flight.
Gee, that weather deteriorated very
I
fast.
know,
I
I
like
know.
the climb rate in this.
Did
though.
you?
Yeah,
Yes.
very impressed.
So- Leading up to retirement, how was I feeling? Not good. And just before I stopped flying, I ended up going up and seeing the Cathay doctor, gave me some great advice, and he said, now the thing is, he said, you think you're all by yourself, Dave, you're all by yourself, Robinson Crusoe, you know. He said, I'm lucky. He said, I sit here and I see all your mates come by and sit on that chair, and they all have the odd tear. Yeah? He said, you think you're all by yourself. He said, the thing is with you guys, he said, you don't talk to each other. The women do. Women talk to each other, not the guys. He said, if I went to Sai Kung, which is a local Chinese fishing village, not far away, he said, if I went down there and found a chap and said, excuse me, who are you? And they'd say, oh, my name's Chan Sing Sung, I'm Chinese from the Chan family in Sai Kung, Hong Kong. The doctor said, if I said to you, Dave, who are you? You'd say, I'm Dave Holborn, I'm a pilot. It's almost like saying, okay, if Dave Holborn can't be a pilot, Dave Holborn can't be Dave Holborn. And if you're not careful, you can join the ranks of the people that only retire a couple of years and you'll be gone. It just happened that 9 months maybe after, so I'm back here in South Aussie, Cathay, having said there's no chance of any job doing anything at all, called me up and said, would you like to come back as a 747 sim instructor, and by the way, we need you here this week, sort of thing. That's the way it always works, isn't it? At the end of that time, of course, when the 747 Classic eventually went, and I had to come back for good, and I contacted CASA and said, can I set up in Gaul with the simulator and do instrument rating proficiency checks, the simulator part of it, and teach courses and all that sort of business. And I have to say, CASA have been and still are incredibly supportive of the whole thing. They're fantastic. 2 years ago, I decided to sell the Piper and upgrade the simulator. The core of the simulator has been extensively modified, new computers and the new 220-degree wraparound visual, which is, I think, as far as I know, is the only one available in South Aussie for people to use. Much as I miss that old life, I've got a new one. And now I've got a new raison d'etre. I also do a fear of flight program, which is incredibly satisfying, and also airline preparation for young people going to airlines to have to do a simulator. So I've got a new reason for being. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, I'll just keep doing this, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I've had an absolutely charmed life. So now, you know, it'd be nice in the remaining years where I can be of some influence to give something back. The thing with the simulator, of course, and is that you can stop it. You can't do that in an airplane. You can also reproduce some very low weather minimas, and of course at the end of that it's a lot cheaper and safer. You know, if you were to go and do all that in a Barron, for instance, it's costing you $800 an hour. You come and do it in here, it's $150 an hour. It's a big difference, you know. So it's safer, less expensive, and I think in the end produces a better result.
After an illustrious career, Dave has dedicated his retirement to giving back to the general aviation pilot community. He puts 110% into every lesson and imparts his immense amount of knowledge and experience in such a practical manner. That's the mark of a truly gifted instructor. We need people like Dave in this industry, men and women who dedicate their lives to the pursuit of flying and improve it for the better. These are the people we need to thank for aviation's excellent safety record. As pilots, it's our duty to keep our skills sharp using any means we have available. Simulators are a fantastic and cost-effective training tool, whether it be Flight Sim X on your computer at home or a state-of-the-art full motion sim. We really enjoy the opportunity to tell Dave's story. If you enjoyed watching this video, please make sure give us a like, and if you want to see more, make sure you click that subscribe button.